Have you ever found yourself in the voting booth, staring at the ballot, completely torn? You've got the candidate you really, truly believe in, and then you've got the candidate you think actually has a shot at winning. It's a super frustrating choice, right? But what if I told you it's not just about politics? It's actually a math problem, and that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. I mean, this is the big question, isn't it? It's the strategic game millions of us have to play every time there's a major election. Do you go with your heart for the person who perfectly matches your views, even if they're polling in the single digits? Or do you play it safe and pick the lesser of two evils just to stop the candidate you really can't stand? Well, here's the thing. This whole dilemma, it's not some random accident of politics. It is a predictable, almost unavoidable result that's baked right into our voting rules. Political scientists have a name for it: the spoiler effect. So what is the spoiler effect exactly? Well, it's what happens when a popular third party or independent candidate jumps into a race. Now, they almost never win, but what they do is pull away just enough votes from one of the big two candidates that they accidentally help the other major candidate win. The one their supporters probably wanted the least. To really get why this happens over and over, we have to look past the candidates themselves and focus on the system. Because the problem isn't really the players, it's the rules of the game they're all forced to play. So let's break down the mechanics of this choose one system we all use. Whoa, okay, don't panic. I know, this looks like something straight out of an advanced math class. But I promise, the idea behind all these symbols is actually incredibly simple. Let's just translate this into plain English. And here it is. This is the whole engine behind our system. It's called plurality voting, or sometimes first past the post. All it means is that whoever gets the most votes wins. That's it. But here's the crucial part. You don't need a majority. You don't need more than 50% of the vote. You just need a plurality, which just means you got more votes than anybody else. And this quote right here, this really highlights the system's biggest weakness. Because as soon as you have a race with 3 or more candidates, it becomes totally possible, actually pretty common, for a candidate to win the election even when the majority of people voted for someone else. So this setup creates this powerful force, this kind of political gravity that constantly pulls everything towards a two-party system. A French sociologist named Maurice Duverger figured this out way back in the 1950s, and it's now known as Duverger's law. It perfectly explains how the math creates a psychological trap for voters. Okay, so Duverger's law is basically a 1-2 punch that just feeds itself. First, there's the mechanical effect. A third party could get, say, 15% of the vote across the entire country, in every single district, and still end up with 0 seats in the legislature. The system literally takes millions of votes and turns them into nothing. And that leads to the second part, the psychological effect. We, the voters, see this happen. We know that voting for a third party is basically a lost cause, so we make a rational choice not to waste our votes. And this creates this vicious cycle that you can see right here. The system punishes third parties, which makes us see that they always lose. Because we don't want to waste our vote, we end up picking one of the top 2 candidates. And the result? The third party gets very few votes, which just reinforces the idea that they were never a real choice to begin with. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Now, this isn't just some dusty old political science theory. Oh no, this mathematical dynamic has had huge, real-world consequences. It has swung some of the most important elections in American history. Let's look at the proof. Okay, our first stop is the classic textbook example, the 1912 presidential election. This was a wild 3-way race between Woodrow Wilson, the Democrat, the sitting president, William Taft, a Republican, and the former president, Theodore Roosevelt, who was also a Republican but was running on this new bull noose progressive ticket. And the raw data from that election really tells the whole story. Just look at these numbers. Wilson cruises to victory with just under 42% of the vote. Meanwhile, Roosevelt and Taft, who were politically very similar, end up splitting the massive center-right vote, right down the middle. This right here is the spoiler effect in a picture. You see it? If you add the votes for Roosevelt and Taft together, they get over 50% of the vote, a clear majority of the country. But because their supporters were split, it allowed Woodrow Wilson to walk right into the White House with only a minority of support. Okay, so that was over 100 years ago. Let's fast forward to a more modern and maybe even more intense example, the 2000 election. The entire presidency, the fate of the nation, came down to just one state, Florida. 537, that's it. After weeks of recounts, hanging chads, and court battles, George W. Bush won Florida and therefore the presidency by a margin of just 537 votes. An entire presidential election decided by a number of people that could fit in a high school auditorium. So where's the spoiler? Well, his name was Ralph Nader. He was the Green Party candidate, and he got over 97,000 votes in Florida. Now, when you look at the exit polls, it's clear that a huge chunk of his voters would have picked Al Gore as their second choice over George W. Bush. It's a mathematical certainty that if Nader hadn't been in the race, Gore would have gotten those 537 votes and thousands more, completely changing the outcome of the election. So after looking at the math, the psychology, and the history, we're left with a pretty big question. If the system itself is what creates this two-party trap, what does that really mean for us? I think the single most important thing to take away from all this is that the two-party system isn't necessarily what voters want or the result of some big conspiracy. It's just a stable, predictable outcome of the rules we use. It's a consequence of the math. And that leaves us with one final thought to chew on. We go into the voting booth thinking we're picking a winner, but if the rules of the game are set up to strongly favor a certain kind of outcome from the very beginning, what does your vote truly mean? What does it really mean to win? It's a question worth thinking about.